Welcome back to this week's GCN Tech Click. Now, if you're not familiar with how this works, you comment your questions in the comment section down below. I pick them out and answer them as best as I can. So let's dive straight into our first question. First question is from Hoop Lamertz, and it says, his mum's got a road bike, but the carbon seat post is a bit too long. Is it safe to cut an inch or two from it? The shape is the same all the way down, and there's going to be plenty of tube left in the frame. Yeah, sure you can. Golden rule of cutting your seat post down, measure twice, cut once. If you are going to cut an inch or two off it, it sounds like it'll be perfectly fine, but remember to account for whatever you cut off the seat post. You need to effectively move the minimum insertion level of the seat post up. So if you cut an inch off, you need to have at least 1 inch above the minimum insertion line inserted into the frame. If you are going to cut a carbon fibre seat post, I'd recommend using a hacksaw blade designed specifically for that, or one with very fine teeth. Mark the seat post up, and if you have a guide, try to use that so you can cut it nice and cleanly, and avoid breathing in any of that carbon fibre dust because it's pretty nasty. There you go. On to our next question. Next question is from Eric D. He says, I want to remove the paint on a modern aluminium bike and then either leave the frame matte or give it a polish. He says, just like Alex did in the previous video. Thanks for that. Oh, good, glad it inspired you. Should I spray clear coat on the aluminium to protect it from degrading over time? Otherwise, how would an exposed alloy frame change over time if I'm dragging the bike through moderate grit and grime? Well, I am glad to hear that it inspired you to strip the paint off your bike, polish it all up just like I did, and hopefully the video I made on it will help you avoid running into any of the problems and tricky sort of areas that I did. My advice would be to polish the frame right up and then apply a clear coat. 2 reasons for that. Firstly, it'll stop the frame from oxidizing and getting that sort of dull finish on it, and then it's going to help protect it. Because if you do get a really shiny, smooth mirrored polish, grit, grime is going to sort of really dull it down and it won't look as good as it could for a much longer period of time. So if you took the frame that I got, which is currently sat in the loft in my garage, and looked at it now, it's incredibly dull, but a little polish and it'll bring it back to life. Next question in is from Josh. They say, hi Manon and lads. There you go. I primarily manage my training using a heart rate monitor. I've noticed throughout the winter that the colder it gets, my baseline heart rate is higher and higher. At -20, it's about 30 BPMs up, and more like 50 below -30. I'm not pushing things hard or even training at those temperatures, but I'm just curious, is there a conversion for scaling heart rate zones with ambient temperature? Presumably, my maximum heart rate isn't changing, so I'm guessing that this actually is an accurate reflection of how close to the limit I am in these conditions. Well, training by heart rate can be quite tricky because it will vary according to lots of different factors, be that how tired you are and your body temperature, as you say. So at the extreme ends of the scale, be that incredibly cold or incredibly hot, your body is going to be working harder to regulate its temperature. Therefore, your heart rate will be elevated. And as such, you do need to try to account for that when you're trying to train to certain zones or target heart rate, for example. But if you've noticed the rough difference in your heart rate according to those temperatures, I think you can apply that principle up through the scaling as your heart rate increases. So if you notice it's 20 beats higher at a certain temperature, apply that scale all the way across up towards your maximum heart rate. Now, I don't think there is a set method for this. It's going to be a little bit of a trial and error process because it will be completely different for everybody. So just bear that in mind and account for the fact that your body is going to be working that bit harder to regulate your body temperature as well as doing your efforts. Next question in is from Harry Millard. They say, hello from Montreal, Canada. Since I bought my bike, my chain wear is still fine. It's under the 0.75 mark and the tool doesn't sit horizontally yet. Is it possible that after 5,000 kilometers of outdoors riding and 3,500 kilometers indoors, it's still not worn out? I'd like to know as to change it before I damage some of the other components. Thanks very much. So if you're using a bike which has got 10 gears or fewer, then that 0.75% wear marker is where you should change your chain. And provided the tool that you're using to measure it is accurate, which I presume it is, then it doesn't sound like you need to change the components on your bike yet. However, if you're using a chain that is 11, 12, or maybe even 13 speed, you need to change it at that 0.5 marker. Otherwise, you're going to start to run the risk of wearing out your cassette and your chain rings and all those different components like that. So don't worry right now. If your bike has got 11, 12, or 13 speed, then you probably should look to change your chain. Otherwise, keep an eye on it and then replace it as soon as that tool indicates so. Next question in is from Mark Louis Bayot, who says, "Good day, everyone. I just want to ask about sprinting and changing gears. Sometimes when I was racing, I noticed that some riders are changing gear while sprinting. Is it safe to do so, and what are the pros and cons of it?" Yeah, that's correct. The pros will change gear in the middle of their sprints, but what you're probably not noticing is that for a very split second, they're backing off the power, so they're not riding as hard as they possibly can. At that moment when they change gear, they'll momentarily take a little bit of pressure off the pedals to allow the gear to change seamlessly. Now, there will be some instances where they won't do that and they'll just crunch all the way through the gears, but you need to bear in mind, one, they're not having to pay or replace any of the components if it damages the teeth, but there is also the risk that the gears will skip when you're trying to change with a lot of load underneath them. And if they skip bad enough that it causes the chain to jump off, well, you could be lining yourself up for a very big crash, because all of that force that you're putting on the pedals, all of a sudden, there'll be no resistance against it and your whole body weight will lunge forward. So my advice would be practice the technique of backing off the power for that split second as you change gear. And if you time it correctly, it will be a near seamless change and you won't even notice that. If you don't do that, then yeah, you run the risk of damaging and causing accelerated wear on some of those components, and you certainly don't want to run the risk of crashing. Next up is a question from Schoenling Wonderbar, who says, I think I pronounced that correctly, probably not. Hey guys, love your show. I ride an aluminium frame and a carbon fork gravel bike, and sometimes when I ride through the forest trails, I come across some mountain bike trails. Usually I go on these trails and it once happens that I jumped with my bike. Do I have to worry about the frame and fork that it can't handle jumps? Can and should you do jumps on a gravel bike? I wouldn't be concerned at all. Gravel bikes are designed to be strong. Sure, they're not designed specifically for jumping, but a little bit of air time now and again isn't going to cause you any problems. And if you want to see just how strong a gravel bike is and how much jumps and air time it can withstand, well, you should probably check out the video we did where Blake put the Pinarello Gravel through its paces. I'm not going to lie, you should be pretty impressed. So don't worry, my advice would be maybe just don't head straight to the jump part and you'll be fine. Next question in is from Ronin Kanushi. So they say, "Hi GCN Tech. I've asked about the spikes on tyres, how much they weigh, their drag, and the aerodynamics, to name a few. One of your representatives told me that you would get back to me. However, after months, I'm still waiting." Sorry, still waiting. Then the fun starts. Is it too difficult for your level of knowledge? And is it only Ollie that's knowledgeable about science? I've got so many questions. Anyway, I'm going to keep asking, watching your videos, and thanks. Well, Ronin, interesting question, and I have seen it a number of times, but today is your lucky day because I've picked out your question. And the other day I had a little bit of spare time on my hands, so I actually cut all of those little individual moulding spikes off the edge of a pair of tyres, a set of Pirelli P7 tyres to be precise, in a 26mm width. So I counted 42 of those little individual spikes, put them on a set of scales, and would you believe it, they weigh less than 1 gram. So in terms of the weight, that is going to have pretty much zero impact on anything of your bike. In terms of the aerodynamics, I think the difference that is going to make aerodynamically and in terms of drag is going to be so minuscule it's near impossible to measure, although it could have a slight negative or a positive impact on the aerodynamics. But in terms of measuring and quantifying that, I think it's going to be near impossible. However, I did check with Ollie about maybe some of the estimates he has on the effects of this, and he suggested he thought by removing these little spikes you could add 43.7 watts onto your functional threshold power. Nah, I'm just kidding. I don't think it make any difference whatsoever. Chill out, ride your bike and have fun. Right, on to our last question for this week's Tech Clinic, and it's from Evan Fusco, who says, would the service intervals be shorter for gravel bikes, particularly after they get muddy or gritty, or just do a wash and the same service interval as normal? So my advice for maintaining your gravel bike would be look after it in the same manner and process as how you would look after your road bike. So when it gets dirty, give it a wash. Maintain the chain regularly, keep it clean and oiled and lubricated correctly. However, what you're going to find is, even doing that same regular maintenance as your road bike, because of the grit, the dust and the grime and all the mud that's going onto your gravel bike, is going to cause the components to wear at an accelerated rate. So the big difference is that you're going to have to replace your chain, maybe the cassette, the chain rings far more regularly. And if your bike has got a 1x setup on your gravel bike, you are definitely going to notice the additional wear on that single chain ring. And therefore, that's going to be a big difference. You're just going to have to replace components much earlier than you're likely to have done on your road bike. There you go. Hope you found those questions helpful. And if I didn't get to your question, sorry about that, but please keep commenting it in the comment section down below. And hopefully we'll get to it in the coming weeks. Right, that's it from me. See you later.